Hello and welcome to this part 2 of my video series on Martin Heidegger's Being and Time. And now we're going to finally go into a bit more depth, or start to go into a bit more depth about this concept of Dasein, of man's type of being that Heidegger is trying to describe. And just to start off, I'm going to read two sentences from Heidegger that illustrates a bit about what Dasein is about. In the being of this being, Dasein, it is related to its being. And then, the essence of this being lies in its to be. And that type of language is a bit confusing if you're just jumping into Heidegger and ontology with no prior, perhaps no prior knowledge of the field and his thinking. But I think it comes down to, I guess, something kind of obvious, really, although Heidegger doesn't use this type of language. When he says that it belongs, that I have to reread it just for myself. In the being of this being, it is related to its being. That essentially means that, well, humans, our way that we are, is that we care about ourselves in some way, not in this conscious, sort of selfish way of caring about ourselves, but we are aware of ourselves as an object or as a sort of focal point of our existence, and concern about this, how other things that we perceive are related to ourselves. And if you contrast this to other beings, other objective beings, they are sort of, their being, to Heidegger, is a matter of indifference. But you could essentially just boil this down to, well, those beings that have awareness or consciousness have some sort of, well, interest in ourselves, but an inanimate object doesn't have anything like that, of course. So the being of an object, there's nothing in that has the capacity to be concerned about itself. And to be concerned is not part of an inanimate object, because, well, I would say that but it just doesn't have the capacity to do so. But Heidegger doesn't put it in that way, in terms of consciousness and capacity for concern. But he has this special way of putting it. But when it says that the essence of Dasein lies in its to be, I think that's just a way of contrasting to this objective, inanimate objects type of being. That our way of being is so special or different from those objective presence type of being there, which would be like their properties, something like that. And I guess that he thinks, or the sense that I get when reading it is that he has in mind a certain view that is sort of the assumed, that is the type of being that is normally thought of in his time. So he just wants to contrast that type of being to Dasein's type of being, which is so different, that its way of being lies in its essence, its essence contains its way of being. But really, any object, any being, what could be more part of their essence than its way of being, you could say. So I think that way of phrasing is just a way of contrasting to some to some to a conceived reader of his time that we're dealing with something very different from what you're normally used to thinking when considering being. At least that's how I read into it. And then Dasein is the name of this being, this entity that we are. But then the way of being of Dasein is something he calls existence. So Dasein is the object, you could say, and the way of or the entity, and the way of its being is called existence. And within this existence, there are these things called existentials, which are aspects of existence, I guess you could say. So there are a bunch of different existentials contained within this existence. And a lot of the book I think is going to be dedicated towards describing these different existentials and how they relate to each other. And he brings up something that I think he will go into much more detail later, as with a lot of concepts introduced so far, or that he's going to introduce soon. And one of the things he brings up, that part of Dasein is this sense of mineness, that that you have a particular type of being that belongs to you, and that we can sometimes forget this aspect, that we have this being that belongs to you, and I guess start to conceive of ourselves as a sort of being in general, rather than being in this particular mindness. And this mode of being, of not taking this mindness into account, or not being aware of it, is related to a mode of being which he calls inauthenticity. And to contrast, in addition to that, there is also the mode of authenticity. So Dasein can be inauthentic or authentic towards its existence. And being authentic, I know, has to do with the realization that not only that do you have your particular being that your existence belongs to, or what you would call it, but more importantly, you have your particular death as well. And being authentic involves something he calls being towards death, which I guess would be one of the existentials, and that he will bring up later. But most of the time we're not, according to Heidegger, in this mode of authenticity. Most of the time we are inauthentic, not thinking of our particular existence, but sort of seeing ourselves in this everyday or general mode, as we are just one. We're one person among many others, and not this unique particular thing. But interestingly, there is no what you would say, value judgments on being authentic or over inauthentic, or that we should strive to be more authentic or anything like that, or that one is superior or higher than any other. It's just two modes that is available to us. But it's kind of, I think that's interesting that, yes, so far, being authentic is nothing sort of bad in anything that Heidegger has written so far. But in relation to being authentic and inauthentic, I mean, that is something I think we can relate to pretty well today. Although he's going to use them in a very he says he's going to use them in a very particular way, but so maybe he will further expand on these concepts that again, they don't mean exactly what we think they mean. But yeah, we can definitely relate to these concepts today of being inauthentic and authentic. But he then brings up the fact, or the question that, well, are these existentials that he is trying to get at? He wants to say that, or he wants to get at what is universal, and not what is just accidental and I don't know if he has said that so far, but linked to our society and our times, or our current place in history and something like that. But he wants to get that, like, the fundamentals for man as he is always and everywhere. And it then brings up the concept of primitive Dasein, which I guess relates to like how people existed in, well, primitive times, or in primitive societies, perhaps tribal societies. And then it brings up the field of anthropology in relation to that. But he brings up this question, and then it's interesting that, well, in a tribal setting, or in like a natural setting, do people also there experience being inauthentic, or are you always authentic in that tribal setting, or is that something that comes with, moving into advanced societies with the cities and this sort of and states and all that? If you have this very local existence, is that something that still comes up in Dasein in that setting? But then Heidegger opens that door, but then doesn't really answer the question. He just says that, well, we don't. Anthropology today is so limited, so underdeveloped, so we cannot really answer that question anyway. So we don't get an answer from Heidegger. And he's also going to show, or try to contrast his system of ontology to previous systems of ontology. And he brings up traditional anthropology, which posits that man is this presence, this immediate, or I'm still not sure exactly what presence exactly means, other than like objective presence, if that's indeed the same thing. But he brings up also theology, which, well, where man's being is transcendental. It comes from, God, and we're created in the image of God and all that. And it also brings up Descartes, which he will get back to. But and then the most, or the first important concept related to Dasein, which he wants to explain, is the concept or the phenomenon of world. And importantly, this is not the concept of the world, but world as a phenomenon. And he brings up the traditional uses of the word world, which can be like the totality of objectively present things, like which maybe we would say today, like the universe, or all of reality, or something like that. Then there's also the use of some to describe a particular context of a subject. So, like the world of sports, the world of mathematics, the world of art, or something like that. And then there's the world of the local personal, like my world, which maybe include, like, if you live in a small town and the people that you see there, and your friends, and the places you usually go to, like your small world there. But he's going to use it in a different way, which is basically going to boil down to a holistic relation of, or holistic connection of relations of significance, a network of a networks of meaning, sort of, that is available to us. And related to this phenomenon of world, the character of world is something that he will call worldliness, which is the first thing that he will try to go over in, try to describe in detail. Then there is the existential. I think this is one of the things that he calls an existential, what he calls being in the world, and here it's a being dash in dash the dash world. So it's a you should think of it as a single word, but not as being in the world. And the reason that he wants to do this, and he really emphasizes a lot over and over again in the text, that it is wrong to think of human beings as something which we can think of abstractly as a separate thing that is then placed within a world. But rather it's that the world is something that is always there for us. There is no Dasein without the world. It's like it's essential to us, and we're always involved in it. So there is no worldless subject. And then in this being in the world, he's going to focus in on the being in part, which he gives already a quick explanation of what being in means and doesn't mean. And first off, it's like it doesn't mean a simple spatial relation that we're just inside a world, spatially. But the word in sort of rather means entangled through care. In that, well, there are things in the world which we are always involved with, and that have meaning to us. So we make things and we think of things and we produce them and we perhaps destroy them and we observe them. And so this involvement or this being in the world also involves the being in sort of our being entangled into other beings, which is also again always part of Dasein. There is no it's a tricky language. We're not just in the world just observing nothing or like no entities, but it's always involves an involvement with other beings in some way. And these things that we encounter in the world, or the beings that we encounter in the world, because with Heidegger, it's really tricky because things or words that might seem equivalent actually have very specific meanings in his language. So it can be a bit, if you want to be really, really strict, you have to use the exact words for what you're talking about. So the word things might actually be reserved for a particular beings. I think objective beings might sometimes be referred to as things. But anyways, the entities that we encounter that he will go over first, and that is of very high, highly significant to us, is these beings called equipment, or sometimes called useful things. We see things that we can make use of in different ways for different purposes. So You see a hammer, which is his standard example, or yeah, any type of tools, basically. And these beings will have also their own particular type of being, just as Dasein has the type of being called existence. The equipment or the useful things has the type of being called readiness to hand. And at this point, it's not that type of being does not contain like a list of objective properties yet, or yeah, it doesn't connect. Yeah, but they're sort of revealed to us, as opportunities to do certain things for the sake of the goals which are related to ourselves in some way, or to our being. And when we use something happens, according to Heidegger, which I think is one of the things that he is kind of famous for. That when we use something effectively, the properties or like the awareness of that being sort of disappears. They sort of withdraw from us. So when you're typing on a keyboard and you're really good at it, you're not really aware of the keyboard itself. You're just aware of like the typing, the work, or when you're anything like that. When you're using it proficiently, the task itself is what comes into focus. That's something that many people really that talk about Heidegger really bring a lot of attention to that phenomenon. I don't know, and then it brings, I don't know, to me at least, it introduces a sort of funny thought experiment. Like if you could conceive of a being that could effectively make use of all of existence in some way, then that being would then become like transparent to itself. Which is like a funny, or yeah, at least to me, funny twist that if you try to read Heidegger's work in a more theological way, it could be a sort of a if you come from that standpoint, then it seems to be like to me a possible path towards a introduction of God into Heidegger's system or something. And a useful thing, it's also an important point that Heidegger brings up, is that a useful thing does never sort of appear by itself, but it's always discovered as a consequence of being aware of a whole system of things. So usually a tool is used for the sake of making something, and that thing is then further related to other tools. So every tool is always part of a broader context of other tools. Just like how the human being is never isolated by itself. It's always involved in a world. The tool is always also involved in a reference of other tools. But then, when you start with this starting point of perception, I'm going to call it, it is then that after we have discovered these useful things in the world, or discovered or this system of useful things and how they're related to each other, it is only after that that we can start to find or come into contact with the objective beings. Those beings which are called for Heidegger present at hand. So tools are readiness to hand, and the objective being is the present at hand. And I'm pretty sure that like a tool can have, or well, both types of beings, you could say. So when you're using the hammer, you perceive it as the readiness to hand type of being. But if you don't use it and just observe it and try to see sort of what it is in itself, then you encounter the present at hand type of being, which is that, I guess that's the normal way of we think of beings. It's like its material properties or objective properties is then what constitute its being. But Heidegger wants to say that this second type, or the second step of observing the world, is only possible because we first have this network of relevance of readiness to hand, and that hones in our perception, I guess, and makes those objective things available to us. So I'm going to read a couple of little bit of from Heidegger just to try to explain this. So, the kind of being of these beings is handiness. But it must not be understood as a mere characteristic of interpretation, as if such aspects were discursively forced upon beings, which we initially encounter as if an initially objectively present world stuff were subjectively colored in this way. Such an interpretation overlooks the fact that in the case of beings, would not be understood beforehand and discovered as purely objectively present, and would thus have priority and take the lead in the order of discovering and appropriating dealings with the world. But this already goes against the ontological meaning of the cognition which we showed to be founded, to be a founded mode of being in the world. To expose what is merely objectively present, cognition must first penetrate beyond things at hand, taken care of. Handiness is the ontological categorical definition of beings as they are in themselves. And then a couple of pages later, to follow up on that. As the existential constitution of Dasein, of its being in the world, this disclosed significance is the ontic condition of the possibility for discovering a totality of relevance. If we thus define the being of what is at hand, relevance, and even worldliness itself as the referential context, are we not volatilizing the substantial being of inner-worldly beings into a system of relations? And since relations are always something thought, are we not dissolving the being of inner-worldly beings into pure thought? Yeah, and just the last part here. As constitutive of worldliness, this system of relations does not volatilize the being of inner-worldly beings at all. On the contrary, these beings are discoverable in their substantial in itself only on the basis of the worldliness of the world. And only when the inner worldly beings can be encountered at all does the possibility exist of making what is merely objectively present accessible in the field of these beings. On the basis of their merely objective presence, these beings can be determined mathematically in functional concepts with regard to their properties. Functional concepts of this kind are ontologically possible only in relation to beings whose being has the character of pure substantiality. So that is sort of Heidegger's way of saying, at least I think, what I was trying to say before. And it's a bit satisfactory to read that, because that is sort of addresses the question that I had from the previous video, or going into this book, that we are assigning, or how you would say, sort of assigning being from the standpoint of ourselves. And it seems that as I understand Heidegger, there's a lot of that I agree with, actually. I agree with, I like the sort of primacy of the function of a thing rather than its objective, and it's anything that is, what we call it, like objective property. So what we see is primarily what it is in relation to me, or in relation to us. And the fact is that, well, he still retains that we will have, or he doesn't get rid of this substantiality of being, but it cannot come first for him. It's something that you first start with this network of relations, which reveals focal points of relevance as tools or equipment, and only when we can which relate back to sort of caring about ourselves, in that we use them for the sake of doing something, which ultimately leads back to caring about our existence in some way. And it's that focus that allows us to perceive the world as separate objects, and then we can have a different type of view of them, because we can be engaged in actively observing things in their objective presence, according to Heidegger, when we're working scientifically, for example. But it's on the basis of this world, or worldliness, that comes with being Dasein. And in relation to tools, there's also something which he calls unhandiness, because sometimes we we expect to find tools, or expect to be able to use tools, but then something disrupts that use, and that disruption can cause two things, it seems like. One of them is that when a tool is broken, for example, then that possibility of using it for the sake of some purpose relating back to us is no longer there. So we cannot longer see it as a tool, and that opens up the possibility of seeing it as just a piece of objective presence, as just a thing. But it's not quite that clear, because I think it says that the objects never really lose their readiness to hand type of being, but it's sort of disrupted. So we get a glimpse of this objective presence, perhaps. But it also reveals the broader context itself, which we might not have been aware of before. So when we lose something, for example, when you lose when your keys are no longer where you expect to find them, then immediately you're aware of, okay, well, I can't get my keys, then I can't get inside here inside my house, and that means I can't do this and this and this. So that disruption can reveal the network that tool is involved in, and the whole system of relevance, which might have been transparent to us before. And he gives these different types of unhandiness kind of difficult names, or at least that's how they're translated into English. So it's something called obtrusiveness, which is essentially when something is missing, conspicuousness, when something is no longer usable, or obstinacy, when there's something that gets in the way of doing something. Then he will contrast his system of ontology, or his system, to that of René Descartes. And so Descartes did the exact opposite of what Heidegger is setting out to do here. Descartes started with or famously, he said, "I think, therefore I am," and he wanted to start with, a foundation which was impossible to question, that couldn't be untrue, and work himself up from there. And so he started with the existence of his own self. And in that conception of being, he starts with just this isolated self, which to Heidegger is simply that's not the case for Dasein. Dasein is always involved with something, with the world. So already that sets out, that gives Descartes a lot of trouble. That he cannot that he's unable to really see the connectedness of the world in some way. But that's the starting point that sets him up to fail, according to Heidegger. And I think that, or he says that for Descartes, what makes beings accessible to us, is that there are properties of present beings which are available to us through the intellect, but that all these properties are at the bottom conceived through extension, through the phenomenon of extending in the world. And then Heidegger wants to contrast that with his own idea of extensia, or spatiality. Because for Heidegger, Dasein has its own type of spatiality, but it's not the type that you would have in a Cartesian system. So to Heidegger, there are these, what I would call fundamental sort of categories, but that's not, I think, the word he would use, of how things relate to us spatially. So something can be near us, but not in the spatial sense, in that, it's physically near, although that is, they're very often interconnected, or very often something that has the character of nearness to Heidegger is usually near us spatially as well. But it's more the fact that it's available for use for us. So I guess if you would have a tool in like an isolated container of some kind, 10 centimeters from my face, but I can't get inside to use it. But then there was some mechanism which would open it up, and the tool would be transferred to a position a bit further away, but it would be released in front of me, and then it would be available to me. And at this position here, it doesn't have the character of nearness, but once it's released, it's further away, but it's available to me. Now it has this nearness. That's how I think about it. And things can also be lying around, which is like an actual idea or a concept for Heidegger. and they can be, there's something more. They can be, well, yeah, in their place, at the position that we expect them to be. And instead of things like up and down, he brings up examples like on the roof or in the basement, and these types of relating to the world is like the fundament for thinking of thinking spatially in Descartes' view, just like before with how the perception of tools, or the relation of tools, is what allows us to hone in on their objective properties. This sense of being available to me and not being available to me, and being in their place and out of place. This is what is the fundament that allows us to perceive the world in this objective sort of spatial way. And that is the chapters that I've been reading. Next, he's going to go into more in detail what being in means, and also then going into what it means to be with others, because one part of one where, of course, you would have to question, okay, how does one Dasein relate to other Daseins around it? But I just want to bring up a couple of thoughts that I have. First, on his examples of equipment or tools. And in all his examples, it's sort of man-made tools that are made for that specific purpose, like the hammer and the pencil and the saw or whatever. But of course, like anything can, like any object can have multiple uses if you just think creatively. So I don't know if that way of using a tool is sort of locked into a particular way of using it, or using anything in any way we want, or any way we deem efficient, can still have this type of readiness to hand type of being. He hasn't gone into that type of question yet, or if each tool has its own, one way of using it, basically. And it's also, I was thinking, when a tool is disrupted, it does reveal something about the system of relevance that tool is involved with. But you could also think of like other types of disruption in your life that reveals something similar, I think. So if your plans are disrupted, if you're planning to go into an event, or to a place that you go to regularly, and then something happens where that place is unavailable to you, you can't go, it's cancelled, or maybe you get some trouble along the way, and you've been assuming that you would always go there, or like it would have to be something that you would go to so regularly that you don't think about it anymore, essentially. But then if those plans are disrupted, then it should reveal something similar about that connection of relevances. But then we're not really talking about tools anymore. So I'm just curious what Heidegger would have classified that. What is an event, like a social event, for example, or a habit. When those are disrupted, are those the same thing, actually? And then last thing I wanted to say is that while Heidegger, he spends a lot of time trying to explain, or I think he wants to spend the most time to explain this this concept of readiness to hand, this tool mode of being, and he assumes that for the reader, the presence at hand mode of being, the objective presence with its objective properties, that is sort of the mode of being that the reader is going to be most comfortable with or have in mind when they think of being. But the more that I read this and I read or read and listen to other people talking about Heidegger and these objective things, I'm actually more and more puzzled by what an objective thing is rather than the tool at this point. And I guess it has to do I think it has to do with the fact of the sense of what is objective today is a little bit different than perhaps during Heidegger's time because of the advances in physics. So it's not too uncommon to hear today that when we see something and we think that it's this object or this thing, someone might say that what it is actually objectively is like a collection of atoms. At least like, and I'm talking more about like the average person here. But then today we were starting to, I don't know if we're approaching that for the everyday person, but today we know that, well, that level that people usually stop at, which is the level of atoms and molecules, that is not the sort of the final objective level of reality. We know that today we know that we can split the atom, go further in and talk about things at a much more smaller scale. And that sort of follows, I think, a bit about what Descartes was trying to do with his worldview, or maybe his ontology, that he wants to search for the most solid foundation, and that which is undivided, sort of for him undoubtable, but then I guess unshakable or unbreakable. That is like the most solid fundament. But today, as we have dug further and further into the objective world, it sort of seems that, as someone who doesn't have a deep understanding of like particle physics or quantum mechanics or anything like that, but just it just seems to me that once we've pushed further, far enough to the bottom, it's like reality just falls out from underneath us. There is no solid ground there, because our logic seems to dissolve. It doesn't apply there. It's just we can't keep it. It's very difficult to conceptualize, and no one can. There's a lot of things that happens at that level that we cannot make sense of. And if it really is like that the last layer of reality is fundamentally, well, unstable, or at least it seems unstable to us. Then if we're going to talk about what is objectively present, or what is objective reality, I guess it just presents an opportunity to us that rather than this fixed level of perception, that this is the objective level of reality. It seems that now, since the bottom is so unstable, that it seems more right to just be able to scan as many levels of reality as possible, and in that range of levels of perception, something we just choose the level that is relevant for us. So it's not that one of the levels has this priority of being like the real one or the objective one, but it's almost arbitrarily which level we want to describe the world. It all depends on what level is relevant to us at the time. And I guess it's just that thought is what is sort of crashing with this idea that the objective presence, the objective world, is always at a set level for Heidegger. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's just something that came to mind when reading about it. Okay, but that is it for this video. Thanks for watching.